9 years younger, 8 years.
Playoffs are in full swing. The Lakers in a 1-0 hole. Minnesota took the opener in the crypt, frankly bullied LA at times. Luka went for 37, but the good news ended there. J.J. Redick admitted his team was surprised.
I mean, I'm not sure physically we were ready, if that makes sense. And really, when they started playing with a lot of thrust and physicality, like we just didn't respond immediately to that. I think this week, we probably could have done a few more scrimmages, but we had our best practice we've had in months. They played live for a very extended period of time. Got a good lather.
All right, so with that, Chiney Ogwumike is back with us. Certainly the case in game one of that series, but really the entire weekend, Chiney, was filled with physical basketball, a record low number of free throw attempts across the opening playoff games. Who's going to benefit the most from this let them play style of play from the officials?
Look, the Minnesota Timberwolves are both bark and bite. Bark, they will talk trash to you, but bite, they will blow you out. And as you said, bully and back it up because they love physical games. The Lakers, they're more finesse. That's not their strength. Instead, they want to do this in the trenches. And you know what's kind of crazy? The Lakers, they thought they were driving an automatic car. Nope, this is the playoffs. It's a stick shift. You got to shift gears. Unfortunately, when you're playing against a team like the Timberwolves, they will leave you in the dust if you're playing like your feet are stuck in the mud. What did that respond to? Or what did that result in? Ant Edwards not having a huge game, but still like 9 rebounds, 8 assists. Jaden McDaniels was phenomenal. Julius Randle hit 4 threes. So they have to play physically, the Los Angeles Lakers, to keep up with this T-Wolves squad that is full of bite.
In Minnesota, physical, and they shot it well, right? 21 three-pointers made. That's the most in a playoff game in franchise history. Chiney, as for the Lakers, they try to even up the series tomorrow. What's your biggest takeaway from them in game one?
So it's extremely rare for me to say an X factor is not a player because players play the game. To me, the X factor is J.J. Redick, their coach, because for the last maybe 2 months, we've been talking about how great it is. We mind the game, the basketball savant, and he has had a tremendous, year coaching the Los Angeles Lakers, but their strategy was completely exposed in game one. They dare certain shooters to shoot, and McDaniels responded in the greatest way, but even more importantly, the entire Timberwolves, they knocked down 21 threes, a playoff record for them as a franchise. So I'm really interested and intrigued to see how they're able to really anchor down their defense and also make sure that they increase their offense because I think they only had about 15 assists. So JJ has his work cut out for him on both ends of the floor.
A 22-point loss tying the largest home loss in game one in franchise history. Chiney, you're doing big minutes tonight. Hang tight. We're going to come back to you in just a bit. Jay, and a developing story here on SportsCenter. To use blackjack lingo, there is doubling down, and then there is staying on 4. Mavericks GM Nico Harrison is doing the latter, recapping the season Monday, which ended with a loss in the final play-in game, which also included the trading of still not yet in his prime superstar Luka Doncic. Harrison made this stunning admission.
I did know that Luka was important to the fan base. I didn't quite know it to what level, but really the way we looked at it is, if you're putting a team on the floor that's Kyrie, Clay, PJ, Anthony Davis, and Lively, we feel that's a championship caliber team, and we would have been winning at a high level, and that would have quieted some of the outrage. And so unfortunately we weren't able to do that. So it just continued to, go on and on.
4, I'm staying. The Mavericks are currently projected to be over the cap this offseason. They'll pick in the lottery among the first 14 picks. The Lakers return to action for game 2 of their opening round series with Minnesota tomorrow night. And with more on Nico Harrison's comments, as only they can do, here's Tony and Mike.
All right, Wilbon, what is your reaction to Nico Harrison's comments? Tony, it's interesting. I don't have the violent reaction to everything Nico Harrison says or does, like seemingly most people who care about the NBA or basketball or just getting on Nico Harrison. I found it incredibly naive when he said that he knew that, Luka was big, but not necessarily to this degree. And I just sort of chuckled at that. I know Nico Harrison a little bit. And he had a very successful career with Nike. And it's interesting now that he's basically being held up to be the biggest villain in the history of sports. And, you know, if he had made this trade, or if he had made this trade in a different ownership situation under a guy named Mark Cuban, Cuban would be getting a lot of the examination, a lot of the blame, a lot of the blowback, whatever it is, because we know Cuban, because he's out there, he's sitting there, you know who he is. But the new Dallas owner, Patrick Dumont, you mean to tell me that Nico Harrison did all of this without the knowledge, permission, maybe even the attaboy of that owner, that billionaire? I'm not buying that for a second. That's as naive as Harrison saying, I didn't know how popular Luka was. So I don't go crazy about everything Nico Harrison like most people.
Okay. First of all, he would not have made this trade if Mark Cuban was the owner, because Mark Cuban wouldn't have allowed this trade to go through, and you know that as well as I do. I said the first day that this trade happened, I said I would fire Nico Harrison and he would eventually be fired, and I believe he will eventually be fired. And I understand what you're saying about ownership, but everything that I've been led to believe was that Nico Harrison instigated the thought of the trade to begin with, that it came from him, it didn't come from ownership. So let's look at what he did for a second. He traded Luka Doncic, the most popular guy in basketball in Dallas. Maybe even in history, though I doubt it. Not in history yet, because Dirk Nowitzki had delivered a championship and was an MVP. So no, he's not as big yet as Dirk Nowitzki. But he got rid of this guy because everyone says he thought that he was too fat and they wouldn't win a championship with him. He was making a long-term decision. Well, fat Luka the year before went all the way to the NBA Finals. Didn't win, but went to the NBA Finals. He traded away a 25-year-old kid. He didn't really give it the full chance to see if he would ever win a championship. Prematurely just said, no, get out of here. Okay, that is the decision that was made. And he probably rused the day that he made that decision, because now he says, whoa, man, this landed on me like a ton of bricks. Well, of course it is. Of course it is, because it for the city, for the franchise, it's a terrible trade. Do I think that the ownership had to approve it? Sure, of course. They could have stood up and said, we're not doing it. Get out of here right now. They didn't do that. They didn't do that. They approved it. But, Mike, it's a terrible trade. It's a terrible trade. The kid's 25. Come on.
We agree on that. We agree on all that. Let me put a PS on this, postscript on this. Suppose the Dallas Mavericks win the upcoming NBA draft lottery, and therefore the right to draft a certain young man out of Duke University, who everybody thinks is like the next great player. All right? And Luka and Luka gets forgotten because this kid goes 17. He's 8 years younger than Luka. Suppose that happens to Nico Harrison, then what?
He's 7 years. Well, you know, then it'll work out, but that's a long shot. That's a real long shot, as opposed to having Luka Doncic on your squad, which you did for 4 or 5 or 6 years. You had him.
Something to ponder, by the way. And it